No problem.
So I want to welcome everybody to day number 2. Martin Chatterton live from Macquarie in New South Wales. Martin, cheers, Martin. Martin was, I first met Martin at foundation course, but he was a tutor at Preston in the late 80s and early 90s. So I'm sure he's got, that's the Preston connection in a kind of way. So, but I'm going to turn up to Martin now. Should we give him a round of applause to start off with, everybody?
That almost feels like I'm in the room. It feels fantastic. So it's a really weird situation, just talking to myself in a room in Port Macquarie, to students who are also in rooms all over the place. So the reason I'm showing you this slide here is not because I'm an alcoholic, although I'm kind of well on the way, maybe. It's because when I was a student, I met a guy called Jack Daniels, and he was a tutor of mine. And he was a big influence on me. And Jack was, I unfortunately couldn't find a picture of him. He was a guy who, when I met him, he was around about 70. So he's long passed from this world. Well, he had an amazing career. He'd been a soldier in the Second World War, and he'd escaped from Colditz. And then when he escaped from Colditz, he enrolled at art school. He became an illustrator. He illustrated a lot of magazines in London in the 1940s and 50s, and subsequently did other things. He became a novelist. He became a sculptor. And I'm talking about someone who does these things at a high level. He wasn't just doing a kind of amateur job. He was actually exhibiting at Park Lane galleries. He then drifted into animation, which is what he was teaching me when I came into contact with him. He worked on the Beatles' Yellow Submarine. And he was the first guy that said to me, just as computers were coming in, we were the first generation of students to learn computers. And he said, what you've got to learn about is changing. So the reason I'm showing you this is that there's two things I want to talk about today. One is the importance of changing your outlook as an illustrator, as a designer, as a creative. And the other thing I'm going to concentrate on is this project, Winter of the White Bear. So I'm going to try and rattle through the first half of this, like really rattle through it, because I'm quite ancient, and I've been an illustrator since 1983. So it's going back a bit. But I've not just been an illustrator. I've been a writer, a producer, worked in film, done a heap of things, graphic designer as well. But this has been occupying my time for the last year and a half, really. So I'm going to play you this. Hopefully this plays. This gives you a little intro into it. So all of that will become clear later on, but that's a little trailer for something I'm working on with another ex-Preston student, Richard Johnson, I think, who talked at one of your conferences a year or two ago, and I'll come back to that later on. So just give you a little bit of background. At the moment, what I do is I'm a writer and illustrator, predominantly for children's books, and I do a lot of school performances, festivals, all over the place. A lot in Australia, where I live most of the time, but also in the UK, India, China, New Zealand, Philippines, you name it, I'll go there. So I go around talking to a lot of schools about literature, about drawing, about illustration, and I'll skip past this one. So this is myself and my wife Annie. And when Andy told me about the theme of the conference this year, I laughed out loud, because the last 5 or 6 years we've been touring schools, and one of the items we do is a thing called Making Your Mark. So we're standing out here, and this is a slide I show kids in schools, and we're doing the hand sign because We're standing outside the Grotte du Pechmel, which is a cave system in France. And inside that cave system are all the handprints from 30, 40,000 years ago. And the interesting thing about those handprints is they were made when human brains were starting to form into what we now know as modern brains. So this is a reconstruction by forensic scientists of an early modern human. And when I say modern human, someone whose brain is identical to ours. So his brain capacity is the same as ours. And I think if you show you this photograph by comparison, you'll see it's easy to imagine that, if anything, this guy looks a bit more intelligent than I do. So when I saw the cave drawings, one of the things I was struck by was how fresh they were. In fact, a lot of people didn't ever believe that the cave drawings were real, that they were old. I think Andre Breton, who was a surrealist painter, he had the theory that they were fake, and it was the early kind of bit of fake news. But what struck me as someone who draws a lot is how good they were, how amazing. They were like sketchbook pages, but on a wall. Now, this last image here, I've put that in because when I was looking at these cave paintings, the thing that struck me about them was that it was like time travel. It was just like time travel. And this image here, which is a photograph of Anthony Gormley's Another Place, which is a sculpture installation on Crosby Beach in Liverpool, which is obviously my hometown. And I've written extensively about Anthony Gormley and the way that these sculptures link the past and the present. But that's kind of heavy duty stuff for a Tuesday morning, but we'll get into that a bit later on. So I'm going to do a little bit of background on the last 40 years, rattling through. So when I go to schools, I tell the kids that there's really there's too many things I've done to go through them one by one. So I show them this little movie. This lasts about 60 seconds, something like that. So this is basically a very quick guide to what I've done over the last 30 years. I hope it plays. So that gives you a little bit of a kind of indication of the type of stuff I've been doing. Two little odd connections there, which relate to what we're doing today. First is that there's some work there by one of your tutors, Pete Bishop. Hey, Pete, who I worked with many years ago with Cadbury's Cream Eggs and What's It and the fantastic animators. And I haven't seen Pete for years. I met him just about 20 minutes ago again, so that was really nice. And the second thing is that let me go back to where that was. Oh, I've lost my plot here. Hold on. A little bit of a technical issue. We'll push on. Hold on. Is that the sheer amount of stuff I've had to do over the years. So for the first 10 years of what I was doing drawings. I was just drawing for money, essentially what an illustrator does. And I was a very commercial illustrator. I always had an eye on earning a living. I had no plans to be a starving artist at all. So I was also fortunate to be coming out of university, coming out of art school at a golden era. So people were handing money to illustrators and saying, "Can you do this for us?" So there'd be heaps and heaps of things I'd be doing. At one stage, I was the designated illustrator for the whole of Marks and Spencer's range. Now, this kind of stuff put my kids through school and bought houses and stuff. It was absolutely fantastic. Golden era, long gone. But I get heaps of this kind of thing to do, like kind of posters, campaigns, very, very commercial, friendly stuff. Edinburgh Fringe promotion, Coors Beer, Sunday Express magazines, illustrations, ads for lawyers. This was a Sin City spoof. I started doing a lot of books, so obviously amongst all the commercial work, there were commissions from a lot of publishers. So I still do this kind of stuff now. This is just me being paid to draw pictures, and I have a number of kind of ways of drawing, but I think that probably the one thing that's happened with my career is that my drawings got better since I left art school. I was really confident when I left art school, but I was terrible. I was really lousy, and I've got a lot better over the years. So there is hope. So this is the kind of stuff that I'd still do now, and what I call kind of bread and butter stuff, where I'll do a lot of character design. I'll do, just tons and tons of illustration. So these are projects now which are kind of coming more up to date. So people would phone me up or email me when they want a particular friendly approach. So my entire kind of illustration career has been based on, well, he's the guy who does the friendly stuff. He does the commercial stuff. I mean, this is really current. So the last book there only came out earlier last year. And along the way, I started writing. So I was doing a lot of work for Puffin in the 90s, Penguin and Puffin, and for Scholastic. My editor at Puffin, he left, went to Scholastic, and he commissioned me to do this series called Bad Dog, which did very well, sold all over the world. And the big change for me was that I was now writing narrative fiction and illustrating and designing. And that's probably the first point that comes back to the Jack Daniels thing, which is I realized early on that if you did more of the jobs that people pay for, you get more of the money. Now, I know it's a distasteful subject, money, and people shy away from it. But when I was a student, I was obsessed with asking illustrators and designers how much they earned and how did they do it, how did they price things. So for something like this, I was the writer, the illustrator, and the designer for all of this. So I got paid 3 times. And that's probably the first lesson of this talk is if you can persuade people to pay you for 3 or 4 of the jobs, you're earning a lot more money. But I would also graduated to writing, young adult fiction. This is the first book I wrote in Australia, The Brain Finds a Leg. And I write a lot of comedy. I write a lot of page turners. And of course, if I'm writing and illustrating things like this is for Oxford University Press, I'm having all the fun because I'm not only writing the story, I'm writing a story that I want to illustrate. So the beauty about writing as an illustrator is that you can conjure up images that you want to illustrate. So I knew this would be something I would like to illustrate. Now, that's something that I kind of keep in mind all the time. So in the last 5 years, this is a strange one. So I started working with Jim Patterson, who, if you don't know who Jim Patterson is the biggest selling author in the world. So I know sometimes when I go to schools that people don't believe this, but you can look it up, and he earns more per year than people like Beyonce, Bruce Springsteen, Paul McCartney, these kind of people, Elton John. He's a phenomenon. And the reason he's a phenomenon is that he if you look under his name, you'll see my name in much smaller letters. He co-writes, which essentially means that he's the Henry Ford of publishing. So we've been working together the last 5 or 6 years, mainly on this series. I'll go back to James later on. And this kind of brings you right up to date with not the most recent book, but it's kind of the one that's kind of occupied my time for the last 2 years. About 10 years ago, again, going back to the Jack Daniels story, I've been a writer for children's books for about 10 years. And I started to think maybe I should write other stuff. And I bumped into a friend of mine, Phil Gwynn, who's an Australian writer, and he'd just written a crime book. And I'd picked it up at the airport on the way to a festival, and we were presenting at this festival together. And I was so jealous of him. And I said, "Oh, Phil, I've always wanted to do that." And he said, "Well, typical Aussie fashion." He says, "Well, just fucking do it, mate." And I did. And I started writing. And this was my persona at the time. Like, children's illustrators and writers, this is what they're supposed to be, like wacky and out there. And there's a rapid shift in my brand. So Penguin, who bought my book, started saying, "No, you need to be more Nordic." And we shot this sequence of photographs for, I think, the first book that came out. And Scandi Noir was very big, and still is, I suppose. And we shot this in Australia in midsummer, but we put filters on it to make it look like it was shot on a beach in Iceland. And it was actually about 30 degrees at the time. I was wearing board shorts and flip-flops there. So I started writing these books, very, very gritty, hard-boiled fiction, and they did okay. And I started writing books with Jim Patterson, like crime books with him, which gets me a lot of doors opening over the world. So you say, "Well, I work with Jim Patterson." People go, "Oh, we've heard of Jim Patterson." And people have started buying the books to develop into TV and movies, although none of them have been gone to screen just yet. But it's a long, long haul getting from the page to the screen. This is my latest book, which again is a crime book, but it's a crime book for a kind of young adult audience. And I'll just play a trailer because one of the things, again, going back to the Jack Daniels idea, is that my kind of message to students who are coming out of design courses now and illustration courses is to be flexible. So I wrote this book, and then I got involved with Penguin with designing the campaign for it. So I'm going to play you the trailer which we made. So hopefully this will play. So the reason I'm showing that is not that I think that's amazingly brilliant, but it's the fact that if you think of my title as being illustrator, in actual fact I end up doing a whole lot of things that are not really related to illustration. They're kind of overlapping with design, film, animation, music, networking. So in other words, I think that when I started out, illustration was quite narrow. You drew pictures and people paid you for them. But over the years, that's mutated into this kind of hybrid existence. And I now view projects like the Tell as fodder for future development, as ways in which I can maybe write a script, I can sell it, I can try and get it optioned, and I can also do support material for it. I can do branding, I can do marketing for it. The other thing that's really I've become a passionate advocate of is collaborating. So I'm a natural collaborator. I'm someone who enjoys working with other people, and I think some of the people you're going to be hearing from later this week, I actually hired and gave them their first job, because I do like working. Illustration is an odd thing because we work solo a lot of the time, and I've commissioned lots of illustration over the years. A lot of illustrators are quite mad, and I didn't want to go down that route. So collaboration is the way around that. So this is obviously I'm on the right here wearing the hat. On the left is Rich, who's my partner in a company called Hungry Head. Now Rich is an ex-Preston student, and he'll be the same vintage as Andy. I think he was probably the year below you, Andy, I think. Now, that book we're looking at there, I actually set a project at Preston to do a novelty book. And Rich came up with this idea, which I said, well, look, that's really good. And we took it to Walker Books and we sold it to Walker Books. And it did quite well for us. And then we kind of parted ways and didn't think anything of it. But in the last 3 or 4 years, we've kind of met up again and we started working together. And we formed a company called Hungry Head about 2 years ago. Another collaboration I've talked about, this is James Patterson, and that's obviously been really successful in some ways. This is a guy called Michel Duran, and I met Michel when we were traveling through Canada, and he ran an Airbnb, and this guy came out to meet us, and I said, you don't really look like someone who's got an Airbnb. And he said, well, I'm an actor and a filmmaker. And we started talking, and we ended up going into business together. We've been working on this film, The Last Train to Sugartown, for a few years now over in Canada. It's an indie feature film, like a crime comedy we've been doing. Another collaboration quite recently. So the guy on the left of the picture there is a guy called Brian Viner. And Brian is a mate of mine who originally from Southport. And he's a movie critic for the Daily Mail. Don't hold that against him. His politics on that. And the guy in the middle is a guy called Bill Kenwright. Bill is the chairman of Everton Football Club, who we both happen to support. But he's also a theatre impresario and a TV producer and a film producer. And we sold a script to him called Dottie for Jenny Seagrove to star in. So that's in development at the moment. So these are all collaborations that just come out of little connections you make, friends you make, ideas you have, and this basic idea of kind of saying, well, I could do that. It's a bit like there's an old series called Boys from the Black Stuff, which is about Liverpool in the dark days of the 1980s, and there's a character called Yozza Hughes, and he used to say, I could do that. Gives a job, I could do that. And that's kind of underlined everything I've done over the years. Is, well, I could write a script, I could write a crime novel, I could do a film. So just saying you could do it, you're halfway there already. Another collaboration with a friend of mine in Australia. This is a guy called Pat Davin. Pat is a bloke I met through Penguin, but we live nearby. And Pat he's a rocker, so he's in this massive band called Grinspoon in Australia, who play like massive gigs. And we did a book together called Alexander the Elephant, which is a classic picture book, but also involved lots and lots of music, and that's being developed as an animated series. And then most recently, just things like this. This is just so random. So during lockdown, I was reading a book called We Are Sunday League, and I enjoyed it so much because I used to play football all the time, and it was Ewan had written this story. I didn't know Ewan from a bar of soap, but I read the book, and because it was lockdown, I thought, oh, sod it, I just gave him a call, And we end up and we're developing this, and we've actually had it with Amazon at the moment. So we're trying to develop this as a drama series. So sometimes it's just you're sitting at home reading a book and you think, why not? And now we kind of we're zooming every week and doing all this kind of nonsense. So you've got to keep juggling things. And what's this one? Oh yeah, so Paul Cookson, who's the guy on the left here, is a guy I've been working with a lot. And just as a side issue, the guy next to me there with the Wonderwall t-shirt is a guy called Don Powell, who used to be in a group called Slade, who were popular when I was a kid. And we're now in a band together. So it's a weird networking thing. So with Paul, I do what I call my bread and butter stuff. So this is a book we had out last year. And I do other things with him as well. He's doing a COVID poetry diaries. It gives me an opportunity to do other types of drawing that I don't normally get the chance to do. So political stuff and, just a slightly different take on things. And then the most important collaborator is my wife, Annie, who would never forgive me if I didn't bring her into it. But in all honesty, she is the biggest collaborator. So we've worked together for years and years and years. She was a textile designer, but who mutated into becoming a graphic designer and illustrator. So this is literally on the desk at the moment. This is a 4-book project we're doing for Hodder in the UK called Dragonville. And it's such a labor-intensive job that Annie's come back and is doing the old-fashioned job of colouring. So I'll do all the ink work, and she does all the colour work in this stuff. So this is like just a few spreads from one book, and I think each of the books has about 20-something spreads in them. So it's a huge labour of love, but not for much money. That's the other lesson, is that even when in the 80s and 90s I was earning an absolute mozza as an illustrator, I never stopped working for educational publishers and other people. I always kept my hand in. And now this is the kind of thing that you get the reward for. You still get regular work. Okay, so I'm not sure how we're doing for time, but I'm hoping we're going okay. Let me just check what time is it? Okay, we've still got time. So the other thing I'm doing is with Richard is we're producing stuff. And we formed this company to... Richard's background is in advertising, so he was heading up... like Saatchi's and Ogilvy and Mather out in Singapore and Hong Kong, and mega career, multiple D&AD gold pencil winner, Cannes Golden Lion winner, despite his appearance there. And what we decided to do was to start thinking about projects that we could develop and take into the wider world as animated projects and sell. So we started out with projects that I'd written books around, and we'd see if we could develop those. So this is a series called Mort I did for Penguin, and we're developing that. Or there might be a series. This is another one, Willy Waggledagger, which was about William Shakespeare, aged 11. Stump Monkey is another set of books I did for Stripes in the UK about kids who are obsessed with world records. But we also started developing projects that were kind of standalone projects, and projects that were the product of our partnership, not old books that I'd done. So we had this one, Vet Girl, which was in response to a big producer saying, you need to do something. Can you not do something with a vet in it? And it was a girl, so we did Vet Girl. But with a difference. So Vet Girl is a kid who's obsessed with being a vet. And at night, she dons her superhero costume and she goes out to deal with wounded animals. But the animals she deals with are all mythological creatures. So they're all dragons and phoenixes and griffins and so on, things like that. Another one we kind of got on the development slate is World War Luke. And this was a kind of response to a personal thing that had happened. And it's basically the premise of it is a kid who has childhood leukemia, and while he's under the operation, the bone marrow operation, he is transported into a kind of Game of Thrones environment in which he's battling for his life, and he becomes this kind of warrior. So it's kind of big themes, but with an adventurous kind of twist to it. Things like the Quirtles we're developing, which are basically characters who all the keyboard, all the keys on your keyboard are individual characters, and we develop these into the entire slate of them. This is a very, very Preston idea. Each of these has a backstory. They're all about wordplay, and so it's this kind of meeting of minds. So Richard and myself are kind of getting together and developing that as animation. This started out as a project I was working with a literacy charity in Western Sydney, which is a kind of working class area of Sydney. And I did a 2-week residency there with some of the schools and communities, and we came up with this project, Green. I started developing it, and we ended up doing this one called Green Thing, which is about a shape-shifting alien. And the idea was that a lot of the development we've been doing and talking to producers and broadcasters is they wanted something that was kind of globally understandable. And so we came up with Green Thing as a TV series that was didn't have any dialogue. It was entirely silent and could be translated into any language without any difficulty whatsoever. Which brings us to this bit, and I'm getting conscious of time, so I've still got a lot to get through. So I wrote a book, Winter of the White Bear, a picture book, 2 years ago. And it came out late 2019 in November. And it's about a little bear who is basically taken by an intruder in the forest and is not sold into slavery, but taken into slavery. And at the end of last year, we were shortlisted for the Prime Minister's Literary Award in Australia, which we unfortunately didn't win because the first prize was $80,000. So it was a bit of a bad news for us, but good because it was promoting the project. So the backstory to this one is, obviously, this is Liverpool. About 6 years ago, I was asked by a friend of mine who's a professor, was I interested in doing a PhD? And I said, well, no, because I'm quite a shallow sort of person. And don't PhDs have to be about something important? And she said, well, surely there's something important that you know about. And I was racking my brains, and I realized that there was a story in my own family. So this was a photograph of my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, Audrey and Arthur, when they got married. And this is Annie's mum and dad and her grandma and great-grandma. And we realized that on the maternal side, there was a family history from Africa. So Annie's family would be described in Liverpool as mixed race, which is a terribly politically incorrect term. But it's still prevalent in Liverpool at the moment. So I started researching the family history on Annie's side, and I realized that, that she was related to the slaving industry. So Liverpool grew very big on the slaving industry. And this became the subject of my PhD. It was a take on slavery. And Liverpool so we're going back to the late 1600s, they would equip ships and basically trade in slaves. And the trade went from Britain down to West Africa. They traded various goods for people. They took the people over to the New World, West Indies, the Caribbean, Venezuela, Brazil, North America, traded them for goods, took the goods back to Britain. And they did that for 120 years. We did it. British did it. And people in Liverpool did it more than anyone else. So there were roughly 10,000 slaving voyages that took place in what's called the Atlantic slave trade era. And half of those came from Liverpool. So we were embedded in the slave trade. Liverpool grew fat on the slave trade. And people in Liverpool offices would design ships that would have enough slaves to make it worthwhile. It was an absolutely evil trade, as we all know. No one thinks any differently to that. But what was unusual is that slave ships were not passive. Slave ships were always in revolt. So the default position of a slave ship from Liverpool would be to go to West Africa. As soon as they picked up slaves, they became a floating prison. And I started seeing parallels in unrest in Liverpool. And I'm not the only person to see this. I mean, this is an obvious kind of correlation between what happened in the past. But what was interesting, as I started researching it, I was quite shocked by this, which was that I grew up in Liverpool and realized that I'd grown up in a society where it had one of the largest black populations in the UK, but was also the most racist in the UK. And as someone from Liverpool, that was a real shock to me. But this is measurable. So when you're doing a PhD, you can't just assert something, you have to measure it and produce evidence for it. So I produced evidence for that. So as a response to that, I've started to look at ways of connecting the past and the present. And one of the ways I did it was about what I call alternative texts. So when I saw these sculptures in Liverpool, one of the things I was struck by, now, for those of you who don't know, these are 100 iron sculptures. They're all replicas of Anthony Gormley's body. And they're spaced at different distances from the shoreline across a kilometre. And they're all staring out at the same waters that the slave ships came in and out of. And for me, when I saw it, I thought, well, they're talking about slavery. And I started writing about things that could connect those 2 points in time. And I came up with The Last Slave Ship, which is a novel, which is kind of part crime novel, part history novel. Now, that's all kind of very highfalutin, and I did my PhD in that. But back in Australia, a friend of mine, Margareta, who I'd worked with for Scholastic and Little Hair Books, who's a wonderful publisher, and she said, had you ever thought about doing this as a project for younger people? So in other words, doing a book about slavery and that slaving story, but for young audience. So we did. I started work on Winter of the White Bear, and I just started doing sketches. Like a lot of you probably do the same thing when you're starting a project. You just start drawing. I started drawing, bears, basically, just looking at bears, copying other people's drawings of bears, thinking how I might do it. Another thing I rolled into this is paintings that I just do for my own pleasure. I don't exhibit these, I don't sell them, I don't do anything. I just do them as a kind of therapy. And I started thinking maybe there's something in the visual language of these things that I can use. So I started drawing. I wanted something to be very elemental and really kind of immediate, so not the kind of commercial stuff that I normally do. I started working my way through the visuals like this. And then when I started getting it to becoming the actual picture book, I started tightening up and started going a bit Disney. So I found that I was kind of doing these kind of slightly cute bears, and it was kind of okay, and some of it I was interested in, but I realized that after a while of doing it, that the subject matter I was talking about didn't match the visuals I was doing. So I gradually started changing the way I was working with the bears, to going from kind of slightly humanistic or slightly anthropomorphized into going. So from this, I'd be going to this. So the story I was telling was about, it was real. So I couldn't be overly stylized. I had to be more like real. And that started affecting the images in a good way. They started becoming much more realistic, which is not necessarily a way of working that I've had a lot of experience in, but because I'm reasonably good at drawing and image making, I can do it. So I started working in this kind of strange combination of collage, painting, drawing, animation, all done digitally. Everything was done digitally on the laptop and on the computer. I started developing this visual language for the whole book, and I realized I was onto something. I realized I was doing something that was kind of different to what I'd done in the past. and was, you know, potentially a really good thing. And we started it ending up with the language that ended up in the final book. And this is kind of like the key image to it. So in the book, little bear, it was the little black bear Yuki. She lives in the forest with her father. And one day a big bear comes in and threatens her. And the key phrase is, "I am big and you are small." Now, I know I'm talking to a number of illustration students here. So I thought you might want to see this. This is a kind of little movie I make sometimes to take to school to show how the illustrations were put together. It's not strictly true because I'm not showing the brush strokes and so on, but it gives you an idea.
Stars cease to spin. If darkness fell upon high noon, it doesn't mean all hope is lost. You'll find it soon. You face the darkest night. Now let daylight erase it and hold on. Look at how far you've come, one step in front of the other, leading you all the way home again. They are big and you are small. You'll find a way. You feel your back against the wall. You'll find a way. You're all alone without a voice. Trust me.
So almost as soon as I started working on this thing, I kind of started thinking about the possibility of making it into a film. So I started getting like Pat to do some music. The things that went into the book, there's a kind of richness in there. So part of my PhD, I was writing about what I call, it sounds really poncy, but tonal signifiers. And these are alternative text which can, you know, unlock things. So this is a kind of really quick guide to that. So it might just be seeing things like this and translating them into the pictures. I'm a bit of a Gormley obsessive, so I was looking at the power of a single figure. So this is Gormley's Event Horizon, which is a really powerful piece of sculpture, and I used that in one of the images, one of the final images. Art illustrating history is chaos. So Walter Benjamin, who's a German philosopher, he said the Angel of History, which is drawn by Paul Klee, which is a painting that he owned, is looking at the chaos of history. And what he meant by that was that there's another history that has not been told. So a perfect example is the slave in history. So slavery is often told from the point of view of the slaves who ended up in America. And there's another slave in history, which is the guilt of and the shame of like basically white Liverpool doing this and ignoring it to this day. And then just on visuals, there were things I used that were, I really love the Hockney's later work that when he was drawing pictures of Yorkshire. If I'm making art in Australia at the moment and I'm kind of looking at these things by Hockney and I'm thinking, that reminds me of home, so I kind of shamelessly ripped him off. But it might be subtler things where I might be looking at Jericho They're after the Medusa, using that in terms of the composition. Obvious things like this, where Hokusai, I'm just basically using it again. Or it might be things like using a single source of light. So Edward Hopper's Nighthawks is taken into a different environment. Or use of light. So I became obsessed with a Japanese artist, Takehiro Sato, and who paints with light. And essentially what he's doing is recording things that have happened in the past and preserving them. And when you're talking about trying to access a story that belongs in the past and bring it into the future, that's a possible link. So I ended up with Winter of the White Bear. I won't play that. We haven't got time for that. But I'll play a bit of this. So I developed an animatic and put this film together, about 9 minutes long. It's the whole reading of the book. I'll play the first 30 seconds or so just to give you a flavour of it.
Winter of the White Bear by Martin Ed Chatterton, published by Dirtland Press and read by Michel Durand. The fish glittered under the water. Little Bear lifted it from the river in a shower of stars. Little Bear lived in the great forest with her father. In summer, she tumbled through the soft ferns on Two Top Mountain. In winter, their cave was warm and dry. The great forest was Little Bear's north and south, her east and west.
So I'll stop that there. So we made this movie, and then so for 3 months every year we tore around going to schools all over, and we were taking it to China, India, the Philippines, and we were showing rough cuts of the animatic and the book to audiences all over the world, and we were getting feedback from them, and that fed back into the book, and we knew we were kind of onto something, and we knew this was a project we could develop. So in mid-2019, myself and Annie and Richard, we went to the Children's Media Conference in Sheffield, and we pitched Winter of the White Bear. We pitched it to the BFI, the British Film Institute Young Audiences Content Fund. And that is a fund that was set up, £57 million fund from the National Lottery to encourage alternative stories for young audiences. And it was a very competitive process, but we ended up getting development funding from the BFI for Winter of the White Bear, which enabled us to kind of put together materials to try and get to a broadcaster. And we did various things like get animation tests done, and we kind of developed the script, we developed the characters, and we kind of did everything we possibly could to make that work. And then in October last year, so this is not that long ago, 3 or 4 months ago, we started scouting around for potential partners, and we sent Winter of the White Bear to 4 animation studios, major animation studios in the UK. Blue Zoo, we got a positive reaction from all 4 of them, but Blue Zoo seemed to be the really good fit. So Blue Zoo are a wonderful company, and sorry, let's go back a bit here, who were formed by 3 or 4 animators from Bournemouth Animation course. And what we liked is that they were a bit like us. They were a company formed by creatives, and so 20 years down the line, they've won various BAFTAs and things. But there was a film they'd done, a short film for their own development, which caught our eye. I'll just play a few scenes from this. So this is a film that they did called Via, directed by Izzy Burton. and we just thought that the way they'd gone about this little movie kind of remind us of maybe how we might want to make Winter of the White Bear. So we just thought that their use of backgrounds, and there was just such an overlap with some of the imagery that I've been using.
The tide went down and never came back in. If the seven stars ceased to spin, if darkness fell.
And we've been looking at, films like The Lost Thing, the Sean Tan movie that was based on his book, and things like Wolf Walkers from Cartoon Saloon. And so we actually got together at Blue Zoo and we formed a co-production company. So we're developing Winter the White Bear as a co-production. So this is the thing I showed you earlier on, and this is a nice kind of blend of illustration and graphics. So it's myself and Richard branding the project. And we're starting to develop this. Now, this is happening like literally right now. We are kind of developing our pitch materials to go out to different broadcasters, different delivery agents. So we're talking to people like Apple and Channel 4 and people like that. And these are all just pages from our pitch documents. And Adam, who's going to direct, he's one of the actual directors of Blue Zoo, but he's also going to direct the movie. Richard, a bit of his background there. Myself. Now, the reason we put this one is Hillary's been working with us for the past 2 years, and Hillary's an animation legend. She's involved with some of the biggest hits in animation specials over the last 30 years, 40 years in Britain. And it was a chance encounter with Hillary. So she just happens to know Richard's mum. And the reason I'm telling you that story is that sometimes the little connections you make can be from the most unlikely places. And Richard's mum was saying, "Oh, what are you doing now, Richard?" He said, "Well, we're developing this animation." She said, "Well, a friend of mine's an animator." And he goes, "Really?" And it turned out to be Hillary. So Hillary's been kind of mentoring us on that since it started. And we've reached the point where, we're kind of now starting to develop the characters and refine the characters into what they'll become in the movie. And I think that brings us to pretty much the end of play. So, did I overrun, Andy?
No, that's fantastic. Great timing.
Is that right? I thought I might have overrun there. I was very conscious of that.
No, that's fantastic, Martin. A big round of applause, maybe? That's fantastic. I was see if there's any questions from the audience. But, John, are you there, John?
Yes, I am.
You're very good at this. I'm rubbish at it.
Yeah, are there any questions from the floor? There's no hands gone up at the moment.
I might start one off because collaboration appears to be appearing quite a bit in this conference week. And the collaboration aspect Martin talked about, I know it was mentioned a little bit in day one as well. We're looking for themes and things to come out of conference week, but the collaboration seems to be one. You seem to collaborate quite a lot, Martin, which is that, do you want to say anything about that? Oh, Nick's got his hand up. John, Nick.
Yeah, Nick, can you...
Am I back?
Do
You are.
Can I question first? Or?
Actually, Martin, it might be worth unsharing your desktop because it might be just interfering with the bandwidth a bit. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll try that. Nick, do you want to?
Yeah. I was just going to ask you. I really appreciated your talk then because it just sort of showed like a different sort of perspective on what I've seen so far from other talks in the past. And you were talking about like the glory days and stuff, and how you used to get a load of money chucked at you for being an illustrator. But sort of for someone coming out of uni now, and I'm studying graphic design, not illustration, like how easy would you say it is to collab with different people from, sort of different fields? And is it different now to when you started out in terms of getting in touch with those people and sort of how do you, basically what I'm asking is how do you like sort of cross into different worlds really? How easy is that?
I think, look, I mean, everything I did was just sort of organic. There wasn't a plan, it was just kind of, I started out just drawing pictures and thought, well, I can do that. I'm good at drawing. I was much less good at drawing than I thought I was, but I stuck with it. And then it just started occurring to me that I was working with a lot of designers. So I started kind of crossing over into the design world. I've always been interested in that crossover. And I just kept my antenna alert to things. It wasn't that I had a plan at all. Someone would pop up with I'd meet who was a musician or someone who was a filmmaker, and I go, yeah, I can do that, or let's have a go at that. And then probably the biggest one was transferring into being a writer, and that was brought home to me because I was at an event for a book, which was a very posh event, and it was the royalty there. And they lined up, there were 10 illustrators and 10 writers, and they lined up the writers, and they treated them differently to they treated the illustrators. So I thought, well, sod this, I'm going to become a writer. How hard can it be? And it turned out to be quite hard, but not hard, not too hard. You could do it. And everything's been like that. Every time you come to a bend in the road, someone says, well, you can't do that, or that's a totally different field. No, you just say, I'm going to do that. And the saying of it is almost the first thing you do. There isn't a magic wand, but you just go, I'm going to do that. And it might fail. Most of the things will fail, but some of them will work, maybe. And that's all you can do, really, I think. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Cameron.
Yeah, hi. Where did you look for inspiration for the Winter of White Bears?
Well, the main thing was from the PhD, but again, it was being asked to do it by.
We're getting some music from somewhere.
Yeah, if anybody's got any music on, can you turn it off? It's just in the background.
Yeah, so it's basically just being asked to do it, and then realizing that very shortly after that, I mean, it was just a meeting. I got together with Margareta, and we'd been working on projects in the past. I hadn't seen her for a while, and we got together for coffee. And I said, we should be doing something, and it just came up in conversation. So as I say, the word I keep coming back to is organic. It's not a plan, It's you lurch from one thing to another. So, there's a company in Preston called 4 Point, and myself and Simon Bailey, I think, does some work at the uni. We were working at the uni, and we set up that company. And I'd never set up a company before. I just thought, let's give it a go. And we gave it a go, and it's still going now. I think you got people.
Yeah, Keith on Friday. Yeah,
I think Keith is speaking on that. So yeah, just say yes, basically.
Yeah, can't argue with that. Anybody else? Helen.
Well,
hello, live from Manchester.
Hey, Helen.
Hi, Martin. You were actually a guest tutor when I was there doing my graphic design degree. Which ages both you and me. I now teach graphic design A level, and I think what you've really proved today is that you don't have to be, oh, I'm a graphic designer, oh, I'm an illustrator. It merges and it can be fluid, which is really useful to my students.
Totally. In fact, I would strongly argue, but there are people who are very specialised, but a lot of the people I came through illustration courses with, big names, big people who taught me, you know, real like titans of the industry, but never did anything else other than illustration, which is not to demean illustration, because I think illustration is fantastic. But if you don't broaden those parameters, you might be stuck, and you might end up not being an illustrator and not being anything else. So I you know, basically I like to be busy all the time. So I still do design work. I do, you know, I do everything basically.
Are you the word's polymath? Are you a polymath, an illustration polymath?
That's a good word, Andy. Yeah, I like the Renaissance man. I think that's a good one.
I saw that image of you and the Neanderthal man was.
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone who meets me thinks I'm a builder, so they're shocked. They find I've got a brain. I'm shocked, to be honest. You know.
Thanks for the talk, though. It's been really, really useful. Thank you.
Oh, good. Hopefully that was all right. Yeah.
Thank you, Helen.
Sean. Hello, Sean.
Hey,
Hi,
Sean.
Mark. Enjoyed your talk.
Well, thanks, mate.
My questions just develops a bit from Helen's, really. Given the breadth of stuff you've done, and looking at the way art schools are configured today, where we do put things into boxes, you know, graphic design, animation, illustration, whatever. Have you got any advice for design schools producing students now into the mid-21st century, and how they should structure their curriculum? Anything we should do more of? Anything we should develop more strongly? Just like to have your thoughts on that.
Look, I mean, funny enough, I read the thing this morning. There's a mate of mine in Australia, Andrew Frost, who's a writer on arts education, and he'd written a thing about returning to almost like the trade school route, where, so I suppose that, you know, there's been a move towards the university, towards the academy being the way forward. And I know from my PhD experience, it was a change to have to do that. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it, the research aspect and the justifying your conclusions aspect. But I do think that probably anything you can do to emulate the smaller kind of cross-pollination aspect of the polytechnic system or the trade school system or the art school system, it might feel a little bit crowbarring it into the academia system. And I know that there's a pressure on modular teaching. It's the reason I left teaching, to be honest, shortly after Andy graduated. I never went back. And, you know, it was a little bit because of that. It was a little bit because it was being boxed. So I think that even when you're working with the restrictions of the universities, the system, the more you can do to debox it on the sly, you might have to do it kind of, you know, undercover, encourage cross-pollination. And I know with modular systems, that's a difficult thing to do, but that would be the only, I mean, I shouldn't be talking about it because I haven't worked in universities since 92. So it's like forever.
Okay, thanks very much. Interesting.
Oh, hopefully it was okay.
Alice.
Hello, thanks so much for your talk. It was really inspirational, actually. I just wanted to ask, you seem like a very confident person, and have you always had that confidence in yourself? Because something that I have found that I struggle with, I'm second year illustration, and I find that even though I'm struggling to be confident in my abilities and in my and that might be because I'm still experimenting with my style. But have you got any, I don't know, advice for any of us who struggle to be confident in ourselves?
What I'd say to you is that none of us are confident. It's bullshit, you know. I fake it really well. So
Right.
I'm an introvert who taught myself to be an extrovert. So I'm very happy just curled up with a book, and but I learned that you won't get far if you don't pipe up. So, you know, the fact that you've asked the question indicates to me that you're on the path away from, you know, your natural inclination to sit back. And I'm exactly that person. I'm not the person who pipe up and ask a question. So what I'm doing now is just years and years of accreted experience of just being able to wing it in terms of pretending I'm confident. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm confident about what I've done and the skills I've got, but there's heaps of times when I'm not confident, but I just sort of pretend I am. So I just pretend you're confident, and it will follow. It's almost
So you make it.
Yeah, it's kind of, and it's a cliche, but it's actually true. You know, people believe what you say. You know, and I'm not saying actively lie. I'm just saying embroider. You know.
Okay. Thank you.
And also it will come. You know, it will. It's not overnight. It's just, you know, you've got to build to it.
Yeah. Thanks.
We've got one more question from the side, Stacey.
Hi.
Hi, Stacey.
I just wanted to know, what do you think is the most important thing to have to be successful in the creative industry? Because I'm still undecided on what route I want to take yet.
Stamina. It's just stamina. That honestly, that probably is it. You know, just keeping at it and keeping going and working through it. And you know, there's an impression given, and I've given that talk. I've done a lot of stuff, and some of it's been successful, some of it's been not successful. But a career in the arts is difficult, and it's ups and downs. You know, so when you see people who are presenting as successes, sometimes they're successful, but it's the measure I've got is I go back to that Jack Daniels guy and have a career that's long. That's number one. A long career is a good one, and a varied career is a good one. That is two things for me. So stamina is really important.
Thank you very much.
That's all right.
Do we have any more questions from anyone? Not from the. Oh, yeah, Maria.
Hello, sorry, I had to wait for the camera and everything to switch on then. Hi, Martin, I'm one of the illustration lecturers at UCLan.
Hi, Maria.
I just wanted to say thank you for an absolutely fantastic talk. It was so informative. Quite often when students start with us, we say, without being pretentious in any way, that illustration is a way of life. And I think you are the living embodiment of it. Do you think that's a fair comment?
Yeah, probably. It's probably true. I mean, I'm sitting at the desk here, and I reach up and there's like a shaft of illustrations I've done for a book, and it's I went into illustration probably like a lot of people because I enjoyed drawing, and I wanted to have a life of drawing, and really that's what I've got. That's essentially what I'm still doing. I'm still on a desk with pens and paper and all of those things. So everything else, or even when I'm doing stuff like pretending I'm a film producer and pretending I'm talking to these people, I'm really an illustrator who's pretending to be something else.
I think we've got someone in the background either doing the washing up or making the tea or something.
That might be me. I don't know. It might be going on.
I think that's fantasy, isn't it? Being a fantasist. That's part of it. That's, I mean, that's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you know, I think that's a great thing to do, to pretend you're something else.
Yeah.
Try and convince people you're not. You know, I mean,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, and you can just pretend it. Yeah, make it up as you go along, but have some talent as well. That's quite an important component. It doesn't have to be much, but some.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Any more questions? I think we've reached the end.
I think so. I think that's fantastic. I can go and continue drinking and socialising.
Before
just reiterate that it is evening time over in Australia, and not 9 o'clock in the morning.
Before we have a virtual stampede towards the door, then I think it's Mike Rigby at 1:30. Is it?
Is it 1 o'clock?
Is it 1 o'clock? I can't remember. Just up and coming, our next speaker. I think it's around about 1 or 1:30. I have to check. But we've also got a collaboration this afternoon. I think is it Dom and illustration and graphics. So we've got an interesting talk at 3 o'clock, which is the students who've collaborated, the graphic students, illustration students, on a project, and they're talking to everybody. So that's our first conference week, kind of peer on peer, and it's all about collaboration. So that should be really interesting for everybody. One of the most interesting.
Andy, can we just remind everyone as well for illustration that Jill Calder is speaking to everyone at 1 o'clock as well?
Sorry, we have 2 talks at 1, don't we? We have Mike is predominantly probably for graphics and be advertising, and Jill will be the illustration. So we'll see. Just sorry about that. Yeah, I forgot about the rotator.
Thank you.
And can we have another round of applause for Martin as well, please? Because that was a great talk.
Oh, okay. Okay, really good.